The thunderous hooves pounded the packed earth as Kathleen Garrison raced through the canyon, her heart hammering against her ribs with the same frantic rhythm as her horse's gait. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape, turning familiar terrain into an alien wilderness that mocked her panicked attempts to find her way. She had been so certain of the route back to Silverton when she'd left that morning, but now, as darkness threatened to engulf the Colorado Territory, she realized with growing terror that she was hopelessly lost. The year was 1879, and these lands were as beautiful as they were unforgiving. Kathleen pulled back on the reins, bringing her exhausted mare to a halt. Sweat darkened the animal's chestnut coat despite the cooling evening air. She brushed back a strand of auburn hair that had escaped her practical braid and scanned the horizon with growing desperation. The towering mesas and twisted juniper trees offered no hint of civilization, no smoke from distant chimneys, no reassuring glow of lamplight, just endless wilderness stretching in every direction. "Easy, girl," she murmured to her horse, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "We'll figure this out." But as she reached for her canteen and discovered it nearly empty, the gravity of her situation pressed down upon her shoulders like a physical weight. Kathleen was no tenderfoot. She'd come west 3 years ago after her husband died of influenza, determined to make a new life for herself. She'd established a small but respectable dressmaking business in Silverton, adapting to frontier life with stubborn determination. But now, lost in the wilderness with night approaching and unknown dangers lurking in the shadows, her confidence wavered. The distant howl of a coyote shattered the silence, sending a chill down her spine. She had to find shelter before darkness fell completely. As Kathleen urged her tired mount forward, she silently cursed her foolishness in traveling alone. She had only meant to deliver a wedding dress to the Peterson homestead, a half-day's ride at most, but her desire to explore a promising stand of wild herbs had led her astray. As the last crimson streaks of sunset faded to purple, the silhouette of a rider appeared on the ridge above her. Kathleen's hand instinctively moved to the small derringer concealed in her pocket, a necessary precaution for a woman alone in these territories. The West might be settling, but it still harbored its share of outlaws and desperate men. The rider approached slowly, his tall form backlit by the dying sun. As he drew closer, she could make out a wide-brimmed hat, a weather-beaten duster, and the gleam of a rifle resting across his saddle. His horse, a powerful black stallion, moved with the easy grace of an animal accustomed to difficult terrain. "Evening, madam," the man called out, his voice deep and measured. He stopped a respectful distance away, aware of how his sudden appearance might alarm a lone woman. "Looks like you might be a ways from where you're aiming to be." Kathleen straightened her spine, keeping her hand near her pocket. "I'm perfectly fine, sir," she replied with more conviction than she felt. "Just taking a moment to rest my horse." A soft chuckle rumbled from the stranger. "No offense intended, madam, but these canyons are tricky even for those born to them, and night's coming on fast." He gestured toward the darkening sky. "Temperature drops quick out here once the sun's gone." As he moved closer, the fading light revealed a face weathered by sun and wind, with deep lines etched around eyes the color of a summer sky. A neatly trimmed beard peppered with gray framed a mouth currently curved in a gentle smile. Despite his imposing size, there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. "The name's Kieran Quinn," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I run cattle about 20 miles north of here." "Kathleen Garrison," she replied cautiously. "From Silverton." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Silverton." "Madam, you're a good 30 miles from Silverton, and the trail back isn't one you'd want to navigate in the dark." He glanced at her nearly spent horse. "That mare of yours looks about done in, too." Kathleen felt a flutter of panic. 30 miles, how had she strayed so far? "I must have taken a wrong turn at Broken Pine Creek. More than one, I'd wager." There was no mockery in his tone, just matter-of-fact assessment. "Look, there's a line shack about 3 miles from here. Not much, but it's got 4 walls, a roof, and a stove. You're welcome to shelter there for the night, and I can point you towards Silverton come morning." Kathleen hesitated. Accepting help from a strange man went against everything she'd been taught, but the alternatives seemed increasingly grim. The night would be cold, her horse was exhausted, and she had no clear idea of her location. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford at the moment. Seeming to sense her internal struggle, Kieran added, "I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm, Mrs. Garrison. But these hills aren't forgiving, especially to those caught unaware after dark." "How do I know I can trust you, Mr. Quinn?" He met her gaze steadily. "You don't, but I reckon your chances are better with me than with the mountain lions that start hunting once the sun's down." As if punctuating his statement, another coyote howled, closer this time, followed by answering calls from different directions. Kathleen's mare shifted nervously beneath her. "Follow me," Kieran said, turning his horse. "I know the trail." With those simple words and offer of guidance, of safe passage, Kathleen made her decision. She nudged her tired mare forward, falling in behind the tall cowboy as he led the way through the gathering dusk. True to his word, the line shack appeared after about 40 minutes of careful riding. It was a humble structure, little more than a single room built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. But to Kathleen's weary eyes, it looked like a palace. Kieran dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. He quickly tended to both horses, unsaddling them and ensuring they had water from the nearby spring before turning his attention to the shack. Within minutes, he had a fire blazing in the small iron stove, its warmth chasing away the night chill that had settled over the mountains. "It's not much," he said apologetically, lighting an old oil lamp that cast a warm glow around the sparse interior. A narrow cot stood against one wall. A rough-hewn table with two mismatched chairs occupied the center of the room, and various supplies lined shelves along the back wall. "But it'll keep you warm and dry. It's perfect," Kathleen replied honestly, the enormity of her close call beginning to sink in. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. I believe you may have saved my life tonight." A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. Any decent man would have done the same. He busied himself pulling provisions from his saddlebags. "Hope you don't mind jerky and beans. Not fancy, but it fills the belly." As he prepared a simple meal, Kathleen had the opportunity to observe him more closely. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness to his movements, a careful precision that spoke of a man comfortable with his own strength and mindful not to abuse it. He moved around the small space with consideration, always maintaining a respectful distance. "You mentioned you raise cattle," she asked, hoping conversation might ease the awkwardness of their situation. "That's right." His hands didn't pause in their work as he spoke. "Got a modest spread north of here. Started with just 20 head after the war, built it up to over 300 now." The war? She couldn't help but wonder which side he'd fought, for such distinctions still mattered in many places, even 14 years after Appomattox. "Union cavalry," he said simply, as if reading her thoughts. "Came west afterward like a lot of men. Seemed like a good place to start fresh." "I understand that sentiment," Kathleen replied softly. "I came to Colorado after my husband passed. 3 years ago now." Kieran nodded, not pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. "It's a hard land," he said, "but an honest one. Treats you according to your actions, not your past." He set a plate before her. "It's not what you're probably used to, but it's hot." The simple meal tasted better than any fancy dinner she could recall. Perhaps it was her hunger, or the relief of being safe, or simply the straightforward hospitality of this quiet cowboy. Whatever the reason, Kathleen found herself relaxing as they shared the meal, exchanging small details about their lives. She learned that Kieran had come from Pennsylvania originally, that he employed 3 hands on his ranch, and that he made the journey to Silverton every few months for supplies. In turn, she told him about her dressmaking business, how she'd learned the trade from her mother, and how she'd adapted her Eastern designs to suit the more practical needs of frontier women. "You sleep on the cot," he said when they'd finished eating. "I'll take the floor by the door." "Mr. Quinn, I couldn't possibly." "Kieran," he corrected gently. "And yes, you can. I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count. A wooden floor with a roof overhead is luxury by comparison. Too tired to argue further, Kathleen accepted his chivalry. He turned his back politely while she removed her boots and outer garments, keeping her dress on as she slipped beneath the rough blanket on the cot. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for a time as she listened to Kieran moving quietly about the cabin, banking the fire for the night. "Mr. Quinn, Kieran," she said softly, "thank you, truly." In the dim light, she saw him pause, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the faint glow from the stove. "No need for thanks. Get some rest, Mrs. Garrison. Morning comes early in these mountains." "Kathleen," she offered in return, feeling that after sharing a meal and shelter, such formality seemed unnecessary. "Good night." "Good night, Kathleen," he replied, his deep voice somehow making her name sound special. "Sleep well." As she drifted toward sleep, Kathleen realized she felt safer in this remote cabin with a man she'd just met than she had in many familiar places. There was something solid about Kieran Quinn, something trustworthy that went beyond his words or actions. A fundamental decency that radiated from him as surely as warmth from the stove. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that perhaps getting lost had been a stroke of fortune after all. The scent of coffee pulled Kathleen from a deep slumber. For a moment, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, she tensed beneath the rough blanket. Then the events of the previous day flooded back her desperate wandering, the approaching night, the appearance of the cowboy who had guided her to safety. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the golden rays. Kieran stood by the stove, his back to her as he tended to something in a cast iron skillet. He'd removed his duster and hat, revealing broad shoulders and dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. Kathleen sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress and quickly plaiting her loose hair into a simple braid. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. Kieran turned, a smile warming his weathered features. "Morning, hope you don't mind, but I started breakfast. Figured you might be hungry after yesterday's adventures." "That's very thoughtful, thank you." She rose, grateful that she'd slept in her dress despite its discomfort. It was wrinkled beyond salvation, but maintaining propriety seemed important, even in these unusual circumstances. "There's fresh water in the basin if you'd like to wash up," he offered, gesturing to a corner where he'd placed a bowl of water and a relatively clean cloth. Kathleen accepted gratefully, turning her back to perform a hasty toilet. The cool water revived her, washing away the last cobwebs of sleep. When she turned back, Kieran was setting 2 plates on the small table, each containing a generous portion of beans and what appeared to be pan-fried cornbread. "It's not fancy," he said with a self-deprecating smile, "but it'll keep you going." "After yesterday, I wouldn't turn up my nose at hardtack," Kathleen replied honestly. "This looks wonderful." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of utensils against tin plates and the occasional pop from the stove. Kathleen found herself studying her rescuer in the clear light of morning. His face was even more weathered than she'd first thought, telling the story of a life lived outdoors in all conditions. Yet there was a softness around his eyes that spoke of kindness, and his hands, though calloused and strong, moved with surprising grace. "I checked your mare this morning," Kieran said, breaking the silence. "She's recovered well, but I'd take it easy on her today. The trail to Silverton isn't difficult, but there are some steep sections. You'll be accompanying me?" Kathleen couldn't quite keep the relief from her voice. He nodded. "Wouldn't be right to just point you in the direction and hope for the best. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I need to pick up some supplies in town. May as well make the journey count." "I appreciate that," she admitted, "though I hate to take you away from your work. The cattle can survive without me for a day or two. My foreman, Charlie, is capable enough." He refilled her coffee cup from the dented pot. "If you don't mind my asking, what brought you so far from town yesterday?" Kathleen explained about the delivery to the Peterson homestead and her detour to collect herbs. Mrs. Peterson mentioned wild yarrow growing near Broken Pine Creek. It's excellent for fever remedies, and with autumn approaching, I like to keep a good supply on hand. You know herbs? Kieran asked with interest. My grandmother was what folks back east called a wise woman. She taught my mother, who taught me. Kathleen smiled at the memory. People in Silverton were skeptical at first, but when influenza swept through last winter and my teas helped ease the symptoms, they became believers. That's a valuable skill out here, he observed. Doctors are few and far between. It's just practical knowledge passed down through generations. Nothing special. Kieran's gaze was steady and warm. I disagree. Knowledge that helps others, that heals rather than harms, that's always special. Something about the simple sincerity in his words touched Kathleen deeply. She'd grown accustomed to being viewed with a mixture of grudging respect and lingering suspicion by many townsfolk. Her herbs and remedies were accepted, but always with a hint of wariness, as if her knowledge placed her just slightly outside the bounds of proper womanhood. Kieran's straightforward appreciation felt refreshingly different. After breakfast, they prepared for the journey to Silverton. Kieran efficiently packed his few belongings, leaving the cabin exactly as they'd found it for the next traveler who might need its shelter. He insisted on saddling Kathleen's mare himself, checking the cinch with careful hands and adjusting the stirrups to ensure her comfort. "Ready?" he asked as she mounted, passing her the reins. Kathleen nodded, settling into the saddle and arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Mr. Kieran." "My pleasure, Kathleen." There was something in the way he said her name, a gentle emphasis that made it sound almost like a caress. "Now, let's get you home." The journey to Silverton took most of the day, winding through canyons and across high meadows where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching autumn. Kieran proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land they traversed. He knew the history of the region, both recent and ancient, speaking with respect of the Ute people who had inhabited these mountains for generations before the arrival of white settlers. "My ranch borders their traditional hunting grounds," he explained. "Chief Auray and I have an understanding. I keep my cattle from straying onto their land, and they leave my herd be. It's a better arrangement than most have managed." "You don't share the common view that the only good Indian is a dead one?" Kathleen asked, curious about this man who seemed to defy so many frontier stereotypes. Kieran's expression grew serious. "I've seen enough death in my lifetime to know there's no such thing as a good death, regardless of who's doing the dying." He guided his stallion around a fallen log with practiced ease. "Besides, the Ute were here first. Seems to me they've got more right to this land than any of us." They stopped to rest the horses near midday, sharing a simple meal of jerky and dried apples beside a clear mountain stream. Sitting on a sun-warmed rock, Kathleen found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, thoughtful man. He lacked the boastful swagger so common among Western men, yet possessed a quiet confidence that was far more compelling. "Do you have family waiting for you back at your ranch?" she asked, immediately regretting the directness of the question. If Kieran was surprised by her inquiry, he didn't show it. "No family," he replied simply. "Never found the time to start one, I suppose. The ranch keeps me busy." "It must get lonely," Kathleen observed, then flushed at her own boldness. Kieran considered this for a moment, his gaze following the path of an eagle soaring above the canyon. "I've got good hands working for me and neighbors who'll ride half a day to help if needed, but yes, there are times when the quiet feels a bit too empty." He turned those clear blue eyes toward her. "What about you? Anyone special waiting in Silverton?" "No," she admitted. "After my husband died, I thought that chapter of my life was closed. I've built a different kind of life here, my business, my remedies, friendships with the townswomen." "It's enough." Kieran seemed to hear what she didn't say. Enough to survive, maybe, but is it enough to truly live? The question lingered between them, unanswered, as they resumed their journey. By late afternoon, the familiar silhouette of Silverton appeared in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys against the backdrop of towering mountains. "Home," Kieran said softly, gesturing toward the town. "Safe and sound, as promised." Kathleen felt an unexpected pang at the thought of parting ways with this man who had so quickly come to mean something to her. "Where will you stay in town?" The Silver Dollar has rooms above the saloon, not fancy but clean enough. "How long will you remain in Silverton?" Kieran glanced at her, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Planned on riding out tomorrow, but I suppose my business could keep me a day or two. Why do you ask?" Heat rose to Kathleen's cheeks. I would like to repay your kindness properly." "Perhaps you would join me for dinner tomorrow evening. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage better than beans and jerky." His smile broadened, transforming his rugged features. "I'd be honored, Kathleen." As they rode into town side by side, Kathleen was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. Silverton was small enough that her absence had likely been noted, and her return in the company of a stranger would certainly set tongues wagging. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she didn't particularly care. They stopped outside her modest home, a small wooden structure with her dressmaking shop occupying the front room. Kieran dismounted first, then moved to help her down from her mare. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, steadying her as her feet touched the ground. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his tall frame. "Thank you," she said softly, aware that the words were wholly inadequate for all he had done. "My pleasure, truly." His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary before he stepped back, observing the proprieties. "Shall I call on you tomorrow evening, around 6? "I'll be waiting," Kathleen replied, surprising herself with the eagerness in her voice. With a tip of his hat, Kieran mounted his stallion and headed toward the livery stable, leaving Kathleen standing on her doorstep with the strange sensation that something significant had just begun. Word traveled quickly in a town the size of Silverton. By the time Kathleen opened her shop the following morning, it seemed everyone knew about her misadventure and subsequent rescue by the handsome rancher from the north. The ladies who came to be fitted for dresses or to purchase ready-made garments were bubbling with curiosity. "Is it true he found you lost in the mountains?" asked Mrs. Whittaker, the banker's wife, as Kathleen pinned the hem of her new skirt. "Yes, though I wasn't exactly in dire straits," Kathleen replied, trying to downplay the danger she had faced. "I had simply taken a wrong turn. And he escorted you all the way back to town, Mrs. Peterson, whose wedding dress delivery had precipitated the entire adventure, leaned forward eagerly. "How very gallant. Mr. Quinn was a perfect gentleman," Kathleen said firmly, hoping to quell any improper speculation about their night at the Line Shack. "He guided me home safely, nothing more." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't entirely true. Something more had happened during those hours together, something unspoken but undeniably real. A connection had formed between them, delicate as a spider's web but surprisingly strong. Throughout the day, Kathleen found her thoughts repeatedly straying to Kieran. She wondered what business kept him in town, if he was thinking of her as well, what the evening might bring. By late afternoon, she closed her shop early and devoted herself to preparing for dinner. She bathed thoroughly, washing away the last traces of her wilderness adventure, and selected her finest dress, a deep green creation that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair. It was perhaps a bit formal for a simple dinner at home, but Kathleen wanted to present herself as something other than the disheveled, lost woman Kieran had encountered in the canyons. As 6 o'clock approached, she fussed nervously with the table settings, rearranged the wildflowers she'd placed in a vase, and checked the chicken stew simmering on her stove for perhaps the 10th time. It was a simple meal, but hearty and flavorful comfort food that seemed appropriate for a man who lived on basic fare. Precisely at 6, a knock sounded at her door. Kathleen smoothed her skirts, took a steadying breath, and crossed the room to answer it. Kieran stood on her threshold, hat in hand, looking remarkably different from the trail-worn cowboy who had guided her home. He had clearly visited the barber, his beard neatly trimmed and his dark hair freshly cut. He wore a clean shirt, a string tie, and what appeared to be his best coat, perhaps not the height of fashion, but dignified and presentable. But it was the bouquet of wildflowers in his hand that truly captured Kathleen's attention. Not store-bought blooms, but mountain flowers similar to those she had been seeking when she became lost yarrow, columbine, and Indian paintbrush, gathered into a simple yet beautiful arrangement. "Good evening, Kathleen," he said, his deep voice carrying a hint of nervous tension that she found endearing. "These are for you. I remembered what you said about collecting herbs and thought you might appreciate these." "They're beautiful," she said honestly, accepting the flowers. Their sweet, subtle fragrance filled her senses as she invited him inside. "Please make yourself comfortable." Kieran stepped into her home, his tall frame making the modest space seem smaller. He glanced around with obvious appreciation at the neat, well-appointed rooms. One wall of the front room displayed samples of Kathleen's dressmaking skills, fabric swatches, pattern books, and a half-finished bodice on a dressmaker's form. The living area beyond was simply but tastefully furnished with a small sofa, a rocking chair, and a bookcase filled with well-worn volumes. "You have a lovely home," he observed, "very much like you, elegant yet practical." Kathleen felt a flush of pleasure at the thoughtful compliment. "Thank you, it's not grand, but it suits me." She gestured toward the small dining table she had set with her best china and linen. "Please sit." "Dinner is almost ready." As they shared the meal, conversation flowed more easily than Kathleen had anticipated. Kieran spoke of his day in town arranging for supplies to be delivered to his ranch, meeting with a cattle buyer from Denver, solving a minor dispute between one of his hands and a local shopkeeper. In turn, Kathleen shared stories of her customers and their sometimes outlandish requests. Mrs. Harrington insisted I could somehow make her waist appear 18 inches around, despite her being a woman of considerable substance, she confided with a smile. When I suggested that perhaps a different silhouette might be more flattering, she nearly stormed out of the shop. Kieran laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Did you manage to bring her around?" "Eventually. I showed her a design with vertical stripes and clever seaming that created the illusion she wanted without requiring her to cease breathing entirely." Kathleen's eyes twinkled. "She's now one of my most loyal customers. You have a gift for understanding what people need, even when they don't recognize it themselves," Kieran observed. "That's rare." The simple insight touched Kathleen deeply. How long had it been since someone had truly seen her not just as a widow or a dressmaker or the woman with the herbal remedies, but as herself? After dinner, they moved to the small sofa before the fireplace, where Kieran surprised her by producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I hope you don't mind," he said, suddenly seeming almost shy, "but I picked this up at the general store today. Thought you might find it useful." Curious, Kathleen unwrapped the package to reveal a small, leather-bound journal with creamy blank pages and a compartment in the back cover that held several carefully pressed leaves and flower specimens. "It's a botanical journal," Kieran explained, "for recording your remedies and collecting specimens. The shopkeeper said artists and naturalists use them when studying plants." Kathleen ran her fingers over the soft leather, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It was practical yet personal, reflecting her interests perfectly. "This is wonderful, Kieran, truly, but you've already done so much I wanted to," he said simply. "Besides, if you hadn't gotten lost looking for those herbs, we might never have met. Seems fitting somehow." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. The air in the small room seemed to grow thicker, charged with unspoken possibilities. Kathleen became acutely aware of Kieran's proximity, of the clean scent of soap and pine that clung to him, of the gentle strength in his hands as he held the journal. "I'm very glad we met," she said softly, finding courage in the warmth of his gaze. "Even if the circumstances were less than ideal. Sometimes the best trails are the ones we never plan to take," Kieran replied, his voice equally soft. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he reached out to cover her hand with his own. The simple touch sent a current of awareness through Kathleen's entire being. "I'll be staying in Silverton a few more days," he said. With your permission, I'd like to call on you again." "I would like that very much," Kathleen answered truthfully. Their evening ended with a chaste yet promise-filled goodbye at her door. As Kieran walked back toward the silver dollar through the quiet streets of Silverton, Kathleen stood watching until his tall figure disappeared into the gathering darkness. Only then did she close her door, leaning against it with her eyes closed, the journal clutched to her chest like a precious treasure. In just 2 days, this quiet cowboy had awakened feelings she had thought long buried with her husband. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once, like being lost in the wilderness, but somehow knowing that the path ahead, though uncertain, led somewhere she desperately wanted to go. Over the next several days, Kieran became a regular presence in Kathleen's life. Each morning, he would appear at her shop with fresh coffee from the hotel and inquire about her plans for the day. In the evenings, they would share simple meals, either at her home or at the more respectable of Silverton's 2 restaurants. They walked together through town, drawing curious glances and not a few knowing smiles from the townsfolk. Kathleen found she cared less about gossip with each passing day. There was something liberating about being seen with Kieran, about the quiet pride he took in escorting her, about the way his hand would sometimes rest lightly at the small of her back as they navigated a crowded sidewalk. On the 3rd day, he suggested a picnic in the meadow just outside town. "The wildflowers are still blooming," he said. "Thought you might like to gather some for your remedies, now that you have a proper journal to record them in." It was a perfect autumn day, the mountain air crisp and clear, the aspen trees beginning to turn golden against the evergreen backdrop. They rode out together on horses borrowed from the livery, Kieran leading the way to a secluded spot overlooking a small lake. The meadow was alive with late-season blooms, purple asters, golden rabbitbrush, and scarlet Indian paintbrush nodding in the gentle breeze. As Kathleen carefully gathered and pressed specimens in her new journal, Kieran watched with evident pleasure. "You have a healer's touch," he observed. "Gentle but confident." "My grandmother always said that plants respond to intention," Kathleen replied, carefully labeling a sprig of wild sage. "If you approach them with respect and gratitude, they offer their medicine more readily." "Wise woman," Kieran said, leaning back on his elbows in the grass. "Sounds like she taught you more than just which herbs cure which ailments." "She did." Kathleen closed her journal, turning her attention fully to the man beside her. In this setting, away from town and its conventions, Kieran seemed even more at ease, more himself. The sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark beard, and his eyes reflected the clear blue of the mountain sky. "She taught me to trust my instincts, to listen as much as I speak, and to value substance over appearance." "All good lessons," Kieran agreed. "My father taught me similar things, though in different words." He was a blacksmith, believed in forging things true from the start, said it was easier than trying to hammer out imperfections later. "Is he still living?" Kieran shook his head. "Lost both my parents to typhoid the year before the war. My sister married and moved to California. We write, but I haven't seen her in 15 years. "I'm sorry," Kathleen said softly, understanding the hollow ache of family lost. "My own parents are gone as well, and I never had siblings." "Then we're both alone in the world," Kieran observed, though there was no self-pity in his tone. "Makes you value the connections you do find all the more, I think." Their eyes met, and in that unguarded moment, Kathleen saw everything Kieran wasn't saying: his growing feelings for her, his hopes, his uncertainties. They had known each other less than a week, yet she felt she could read his expressions as clearly as the pages of a familiar book. Impulsively, she reached out to touch his hand. Not so alone, perhaps. Kieran's fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. For a long moment, they simply sat together in the meadow, hands entwined, surrounded by wildflowers and the vast beauty of the mountains. No declarations were made, no promises given, yet Kathleen felt that something profound had been exchanged between them, an acknowledgement of possibility, of paths converging. The spell was broken by distant thunder rolling across the peaks. Dark clouds had begun gathering over the western mountains, a reminder that mountain weather could change in an instant. "We should head back," Kieran said reluctantly, helping Kathleen to her feet. "Those clouds look like they mean business." They packed up their picnic quickly and mounted their horses, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. They were still a mile from town when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a steady downpour that left them both thoroughly drenched. By the time they reached the livery stable, Kathleen's dress was sodden and clinging uncomfortably, her hair plastered to her neck. Yet despite her bedraggled appearance, she found herself laughing as Kieran helped her dismount. "We look like a pair of drowned rats," she said, pushing wet strands of hair from her face. Kieran's own laugh joined hers, his usual reserve softened by the shared adventure. Water dripped from his hat brim and trickled down his face, but his eyes were bright with a joy that matched her own. "Still the most beautiful woman in Colorado territory," he said with such simple sincerity that Kathleen's breath caught. Heedless of the stable hand's curious gaze, Kieran reached out to tuck a strand of wet hair behind her ear, his touch infinitely gentle. "Kathleen," he began, then seemed to reconsider what he had been about to say. "Let me see you safely home before you catch your death in these wet clothes." They dashed through the rain-slick streets to her cottage, arriving at her door breathless and laughing. Inside, Kathleen lit the lamps while Kieran built up the fire in her small stove, its warmth soon chasing away the chill of the rain. "You should change into something dry," Kieran said, standing awkwardly by the door. "I should probably stay," Kathleen said impulsively. "At least until the worst of the storm passes. I can make tea to warm us." Seeing his hesitation, she added, "Please, I'm not ready for the day to end just yet." Something in her voice must have conveyed her sincerity, for Kieran nodded. "I'll wait here while you change." Kathleen retreated to her bedroom, quickly exchanging her sodden dress for a simple wrapper over a dry chemise and petticoat. It wasn't entirely proper attire for receiving a gentleman caller, but under the circumstances, practicality seemed more important than strict propriety. She loosened her wet hair, combing it quickly before returning to the main room. Kieran had removed his drenched coat and hat, hanging them near the stove to dry. His shirt still clung damply to his broad shoulders, but he had rolled up the sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. He turned as she entered, his expression softening at the sight of her with her hair loose around her shoulders. "Better?" he asked, his voice a touch lower than usual. "Much," she replied, suddenly shy under his appreciative gaze. To cover her momentary confusion, she busied herself preparing tea, setting the kettle on the stove and arranging cups on a small tray. "I hope you don't mind chamomile. It's good for warding off chills after getting soaked." "Sounds perfect," Kieran said, moving to help her. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same cup, sending a jolt of awareness through Kathleen that had nothing to do with the static electricity generated by the storm. As they sipped their tea before the fire, the rain beating a steady rhythm on the roof, conversation flowed easily between them. They spoke of books they had read, of places they had seen, of dreams they still harbored. Kathleen found herself sharing thoughts she had never voiced to another, soul her occasional loneliness in Silverton, despite the friendships she had formed. Her hope of someday expanding her herbal practice into a proper apothecary. Her fear that she might never again experience the deep connection she had once known with her husband. "I think that's what we all want ultimately," Kieran said thoughtfully, staring into the flames. "Not just companionship, but true understanding, someone who sees us as we really are and values what they see." "Yes," Kathleen agreed softly. "Exactly that." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the small cottage, Kathleen felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. Kieran's presence felt right somehow, as if he belonged in this space, by this fire, sharing this moment with her. When he finally rose to leave, the rain having subsided to a gentle drizzle, Kathleen walked him to the door. They stood facing each other in the soft lamplight, neither quite ready to say goodbye, "When will you return to your ranch?" she asked, dreading the answer. "I should leave tomorrow," Kieran replied, regret evident in his voice. "I've been away longer than planned already. My foreman is capable, but there's work that needs my attention before winter sets in." Kathleen nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. She had known this moment would come. Kieran had responsibilities, a life that existed beyond their brief time together in Silverton. Yet the prospect of his departure left an ache in her chest that surprised her with its intensity. "Kathleen," Kieran said softly, taking her hand in his, "these past few days have been, I don't have the words to describe what they've meant to me." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "I'd like to see you again if you're willing." "I am," she replied without hesitation. "My ranch is a day's ride north, not so far really." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "And I find I have reason to visit Silverton more frequently these days." "Is that so?" Kathleen couldn't help returning his smile. "What reason might that be?" Instead of answering with words, Kieran leaned down and with infinite gentleness pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, a question more than a demand, but it sent waves of warmth cascading through Kathleen's entire being. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret or hesitation. Finding none, he brushed his knuckles softly against her cheek. "That's my reason," he said simply. Long after Kieran had disappeared into the rainy night, Kathleen stood by her window, fingers pressed to lips that still tingled from his kiss. Outside, the storm had washed the world clean, leaving the streets of Silverton glistening in the intermittent moonlight. Inside, something new had awakened in her heart, something both terrifying and wonderful, a possibility she had never expected to find again. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Kathleen woke early, her mind already filled with thoughts of Kieran and the bittersweet knowledge that he would be leaving Silverton that day. She had just finished dressing when a knock sounded at her door. Opening it revealed Kieran standing on her threshold, his horse saddled and ready for travel behind him. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said, his blue eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat, "and to give you this." He held out a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with a simple flower carved into its lid. Kathleen accepted it, opening it to find a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a compass rose. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the intricate design. "I thought it fitting," Kieran explained, "to help you find your way should you ever be lost again." He smiled, a touch of humor lightening his serious expression. "Though I hope next time you'll allow me to accompany you on your herb-gathering expeditions." "I would like that," Kathleen replied, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and all it represented. Impulsively, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small cloth pouch. "I have something for you as well. It's not nearly as fine, but—" Kieran opened the pouch, revealing a carefully crafted sachet filled with dried herbs. He brought it to his nose, inhaling the complex, pleasant scent. "Lavender for peace, rosemary for remembrance, and sage for wisdom," Kathleen explained. "I thought you might hang it in your cabin to keep the air sweet and to remind you of me, perhaps." "As if I could forget," Kieran said softly. He tucked the sachet carefully inside his coat, close to his heart. "May I write to you? I would be disappointed if you didn't. And may I call on you when next I come to town? I insist upon it." Kieran smiled then, the full, unreserved smile that transformed his rugged features and made Kathleen's heart skip a beat. Gently, he drew her into his arms, mindful of the open door and the possibility of prying eyes. His kiss this time was more assured, though still respectful, a promise rather than a farewell. "Until we meet again, Kathleen Garrison," he murmured against her hair. "Until then, Kieran Quinn," she replied, memorizing the solid feel of him, the scent of his skin, the sound of his steady heartbeat beneath her ear. With visible reluctance, Kieran released her and mounted his stallion. With a final tip of his hat, he turned the horse toward the north road and rode away, his straight back and proud posture a striking silhouette against the morning sky. Kathleen watched until he disappeared from view, the silver compass brooch clutched in her hand like a talisman. Only then did she pin it to her dress, directly over her heart, before turning to face the day ahead, a day that somehow seemed both emptier and more full of promise than any she could remember. The weeks following Kieran's departure established a new rhythm in Kathleen's life. His letters arrived with gratifying regularity, carried by the twice-weekly mail coach that connected Silverton to the larger settlements north and east. Each carefully penned page revealed more of the man she was coming to care for deeply: his quiet humor, his thoughtful nature, his deep attachment to the land he had claimed as his own. He wrote of his daily life on the ranch, the challenges of preparing for winter, the antics of a new foal born to his favorite mare, the satisfaction of seeing fat cattle grazing on land he had nursed back from overgrazing. Between the lines, Kathleen read his growing feelings for her, expressed not in flowery declarations but in the consistent care with which he addressed her concerns, remembered details she had shared, and invited her into the world he inhabited. In return, Kathleen filled her own letters with the happenings of Silverton, with progress on her expanding herb garden behind the cottage, with thoughts and feelings she had shared with no one else. She pressed flowers between the pages: columbine, forget-me-not, wild rose, sending pieces of her mountain home to him. October slipped into November, bringing the first serious snows to the high country. Kathleen found herself watching the mountain passes with increasing concern, knowing they could close at any time, cutting off travel until spring. The prospect of months without seeing Kieran weighed heavily on her heart. Then, on a blustery afternoon when wind-driven snow obscured the view from her shop window, the door opened to admit a tall figure wrapped in a heavy coat, crusted with ice. For a moment, Kathleen didn't recognize the snow-covered traveler until he removed his hat, revealing Kieran's familiar features beneath a layer of frost. "Kieran," she exclaimed, rushing forward, "what on earth are you doing traveling in this weather?" He stamped snow from his boots, his smile brilliant against his wind-reddened face. "Had to see you," he said simply. "Weather's been threatening for days. Knew if I didn't come now, the passes might close before Christmas." Without hesitation, Kathleen wrapped her arms around him, heedless of the melting snow that dampened her dress. Kieran returned her embrace, holding her close as if reassuring himself that she was real. "You're frozen through," she scolded gently, pulling back to look at him properly. "Come, let me close the shop early. You need warming up." At her cottage, Kathleen insisted Kieran change into dry clothes, a spare set he had prudently packed in his saddlebags while she prepared hot cider spiced with cinnamon and cloves. When he emerged from her small spare room, she had a meal warming on the stove and a fire blazing in the hearth. "This is heaven," Kieran sighed, accepting the steaming mug she offered. "Been riding since dawn through that blizzard." "You could have frozen to death," Kathleen chided, though her tone held more concern than reproach. "The mountains are treacherous this time of year." "Worth the risk," he replied simply, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. "Couldn't bear the thought of not seeing you until spring." His straightforward declaration sent warmth spreading through Kathleen that had nothing to do with the fire or the spiced cider. She sat beside him on the small sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I've missed you," she admitted softly. "Your letters help, but—" "But they're not the same," Kieran finished for her, taking her free hand in his. "I know, that's why I had to come, storm or no storm." They shared a quiet meal, catching up on the details that hadn't made it into their letters. Afterward, with the storm howling outside, they sat before the fire, talking long into the night. Kathleen found herself curled against Kieran's side, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against his chest. It felt right, this closeness, as if they had known each other for years rather than months. "How long can you stay?" she asked finally, dreading the answer but needing to know. "A few days," Kieran replied, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Left Charlie in charge, but with winter setting in, I can't be away too long. Cattle need extra care when the snow's deep." Kathleen nodded against his chest, determined to cherish every moment of his brief visit. "I'm glad you came, even if it can't be for long." Kieran's hand moved to tilt her face up to his, In the flickering firelight, his eyes were dark and serious. "Kathleen," he said softly, "I didn't brave that blizzard just for a casual visit." Her heart began to pound as she read the intent in his gaze. "No, no." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I came because I couldn't wait another day to tell you that I love you." The simple declaration, spoken without embellishment but with profound sincerity, brought tears to Kathleen's eyes. "Kieran." "I know it's fast," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "We've known each other barely 3 months, but I've lived long enough to recognize what's real and what matters. And you, Kathleen Garrison, matter more to me than anything ever has." A tear spilled down Kathleen's cheek. Kieran caught it with his thumb, his touch infinitely gentle. "You don't have to say anything now," he assured her. "I just needed you to know." "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming as naturally as breathing. "I think I've known since that first day when you appeared on the ridge and said, 'Follow me. I know the trail.'" Joy transformed Kieran's face, erasing the lines of worry that had creased his brow. With reverent care, he framed her face between his hands and kissed her a kiss that spoke of devotion, of promises, of a future neither had dared to imagine until now. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly, Kathleen. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." "I want that too," she admitted, her heart so full it felt it might overflow. "But your ranch is so far and my business is here. We'll figure it out," Kieran promised, "together, one step at a time." And in that moment, with the storm raging outside but warmth and love surrounding them within, Kathleen believed him completely. The following days passed in a golden haze for Kathleen. Despite the continuing snow, she and Kieran found plenty to occupy them. They shared meals, took walks when the weather permitted, and spent evenings planning a future together. Kieran spoke of improvements he wanted to make to his ranch house, adding a proper kitchen, building bookshelves for Kathleen's volumes on herbs and medicine, planting a large garden where she could grow both flowers and healing plants. "I want it to be a real home," he explained as they sat at her small table, sketching rough plans on a piece of paper. "Not just a place to eat and sleep between work days, but somewhere that reflects both of us." Kathleen's heart swelled at the care he was taking to include her interests and needs in his vision. Unlike many men of her acquaintance, Kieran didn't simply expect a woman to adapt to his existing life, he genuinely wanted to build something new together. They also discussed practical matters. Kathleen's dressmaking business was thriving in Silverton, providing both income and a valued service to the community. Moving to Kieran's ranch would mean giving that up, at least in its current form. "Perhaps you could still create special pieces," Kieran suggested, "wedding dresses and the like. Clients could come to the ranch for fittings, or you could travel to town occasionally." "And I could expand my work with herbs," Kathleen added, warming to the possibilities. "There's always need for healing remedies, especially in remote areas." "The Ute women might share their knowledge with you," Kieran said thoughtfully. "They have plant medicines that have been used for generations." Each conversation wove their separate lives more tightly together, creating a shared vision that excited them both. Yet as the week progressed, the reality of their situation cast an inevitable shadow over their happiness. The snow continued to fall, and soon Kieran would need to return to his ranch before the passes became truly impassable. On the evening before his planned departure, they sat before the fire in Kathleen's cottage, savoring their remaining hours together. Outside, the storm had finally broken, leaving Silverton buried under nearly 2 feet of snow. The night was clear and cold, stars glittering like diamonds in the black sky visible through Kathleen's frost-edged window. "I've been thinking," Kieran said, breaking a comfortable silence. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, his fingers tapping in irregular rhythm against his thigh. "About us, about the future." "As have I," Kathleen replied, reaching over to still his restless hand with her own. Kieran turned to face her fully, his expression serious yet filled with hope. "I know we plan to wait to court properly over time, but this week has shown me something important." He squeezed her fingers gently. Life is uncertain, Kathleen, especially out here. The mountains don't care about our plans or timetables. They close passes when they will. They send storms without warning. That's true, Kathleen agreed, wondering where he was leading. I don't want to leave tomorrow not knowing when I'll see you again, Kieran continued, his voice dropping to that low, earnest tone that never failed to touch her heart. I don't want to spend another night wondering if you're safe, if you're well, if you're happy. With fluid grace that belied his size, Kieran slid from the sofa to one knee before her, still holding her hand in his. From his pocket, he withdrew a small object that caught the firelight and sent it dancing across the room, a ring, simple but beautifully crafted, a small diamond set in a band of twisting silver that resembled vines. Kathleen Garrison, he said, his blue eyes never leaving hers, will you marry me? Not someday in the distant future, but now, before winter truly sets in, before we're separated again. I know it's sudden, but yes, Kathleen interrupted, tears of joy filling her eyes. Yes, Kieran Quinn, I will marry you, now, tomorrow, whenever you wish. Relief and joy transformed his features. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her alone. I had it crafted in Denver last month, he admitted. Carried it with me ever since, waiting for the right moment. Kathleen examined the ring, touched by the thought that had gone into its design. It's beautiful, like wildflowers growing around my finger. That was the idea, Kieran said, rising to sit beside her once more. I wanted something that would remind you of our beginning of herbs and meadows and finding each other when we least expected it. She leaned into his embrace, marveling at how perfectly they fit together, at how completely right this decision felt despite its apparent haste. When shall we be married? Tomorrow, Kieran suggested boldly. Before I leave. It would mean returning to the ranch alone while I prepare our home, but you could join me in the spring when travel is easier, or sooner if a safe opportunity presents itself. Tomorrow, Kathleen echoed, considering. It would be a simple ceremony hastily arranged, but that seemed fitting somehow. Their relationship had begun with unexpected circumstances. Why shouldn't their marriage follow the same pattern? Yes, tomorrow it shall be. The following morning found Silverton buzzing with news of the impending wedding. The town's only minister, Reverend Hollister, readily agreed to perform the ceremony on short notice. Mrs. Peterson and several other ladies descended upon Kathleen's cottage, helping her prepare for the unexpected event. Always knew there was something special brewing between you two, Mrs. Peterson declared as she arranged Kathleen's hair into an elegant style adorned with small white flowers from the town's lone greenhouse. Never seen two people more obviously meant for each other. Kathleen wore her best dress, a deep blue creation she had made the previous spring, with a fitted bodice and graceful skirt that flattered her slender figure. It wasn't a traditional wedding gown, but with a hastily crafted veil of delicate lace attached to a simple circlet of flowers, she felt every inch a bride. The ceremony took place at noon in Silverton's small church. Despite the short notice, it seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the union. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews and the simple altar where Reverend Hollister waited. When Kathleen entered on the arm of Mr. Peterson, who had volunteered to give her away, she had eyes only for Kieran. He stood tall and proud at the altar, dressed in his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven for the occasion. The love shining in his eyes as he watched her approach nearly took her breath away. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Kieran placed a simple gold band alongside the engagement ring on Kathleen's finger, his hands were steady but his voice shook with emotion. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, the words carrying clearly through the hushed church. "And with all that I am and all that I have, I honor you." When Reverend Hollister pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of all they would share in the years to come. The assembled townsfolk erupted in cheers and well wishes, surrounding the newlyweds with genuine joy. A hasty reception followed at the town's hotel, where the proprietor had arranged a special luncheon in honor of the occasion. Toasts were made, cake was shared, and for a few precious hours, Kathleen and Kieran celebrated their union surrounded by friends who had become like family to Kathleen during her years in Silverton. All too soon, however, it was time for Kieran to depart. The weather remained clear, but more snow was predicted, and he needed to reach safer elevations before nightfall. They shared a private goodbye in Kathleen's cottage, now theirs together, though she would remain there alone until spring. "It feels wrong to leave you on our wedding day," Kieran said, holding her close as if memorizing the feel of her in his arms. "It's only for a little while," Kathleen assured him, forcing brightness into her voice despite the ache in her heart. "You'll prepare our home and I'll join you when the pass is open. We have our whole lives ahead of us." Kieran pressed his forehead to hers, his hands warm against her back. "I'll write every day," he promised, "and I'll come for you at the first sign of spring, no matter what." "I'll be waiting," she whispered, "with my heart full of love and my bags packed." Their final kiss held all the passion they had been too proper to display before the townspeople, a husband's kiss to his wife, filled with promises of nights to come when they would not need to part. Then, with visible reluctance, Kieran mounted his stallion and rode north, leaving Kathleen standing in the doorway of their cottage, her hand raised in farewell until he disappeared from sight. That evening, Kathleen sat alone before the fire, her fingers constantly straying to the rings on her left hand. Mrs. Quinn, she thought wonderingly. Kathleen Quinn. The name felt strange yet right, like a garment perfectly tailored but not yet broken in through wear. Outside, snow began to fall once more, soft flakes drifting past her window. Somewhere to the north, Kieran was riding through that same snow, heading home to prepare for their shared future. The separation hurt, but Kathleen found comfort in knowing it was temporary, a necessary interlude before they began their life together in earnest. Winter settled over Silverton with its usual icy grip. The passes closed completely by early December, cutting off all but the most essential travel until spring. Kathleen fell into a routine running her shop during the day, working on special projects in the evenings, and writing daily letters to Kieran that accumulated in a growing stack, waiting for the first mail carrier who could make it through once the weather improved. His own letters stopped arriving once the passes closed, but she had expected this. Before leaving, he had explained that even if a letter somehow made it as far as Durango, there would be no way to deliver it the final distance to Silverton until the snow retreated. "We'll have quite a correspondence to catch up on come spring," he had said with a smile. Christmas came and went, celebrated with friends but tinged with the bittersweet knowledge that her husband was marking the holiday far away. Kathleen threw herself into community activities, organizing a special dinner for those who might otherwise be alone on the holiday, contributing hand-sewn gifts for the town's children, preparing herbal remedies for those suffering from winter ailments. January brought the deepest cold, days when the temperature rarely rose above freezing and nights when it plummeted far below zero. Kathleen added extra quilts to her bed and wore layers of flannel, but still she felt the absence of Kieran's warmth beside her like a physical ache. February arrived with increased snowfall, but also with the first hints that winter's grip might eventually loosen. On rare clear days, the sun felt a touch warmer, and occasionally Kathleen would catch the distant drip of melting icicles during the warmest part of the afternoon. By early March, anticipation had become a constant companion. Each morning, Kathleen checked the sky and the distant mountain passes, looking for signs that travel might soon be possible. She began packing her belongings, deciding what to bring to her new home and what to sell or give away. She trained young Sarah Miller, the blacksmith's daughter who had shown an aptitude for sewing, to take over the most basic aspects of the dressmaking business. "I'll still create special pieces," Kathleen explained to her disappointed customers. "Wedding dresses and the like. But for everyday needs, Sarah will serve you well." Then, on a morning in late March when the sun shone with genuine warmth from a cloudless sky, the town's lookout spotted a rider approaching from the north. Word spread quickly, and by the time the traveler reached the outskirts of town, a small crowd had gathered to greet him, the first visitor to brave the newly passable mountain trails. Kathleen stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding with hope and anxiety. Had Kieran been able to send word with this traveler? Or perhaps, just perhaps. As the rider drew closer, she caught her breath. Even at a distance, she would recognize that straight-backed posture, that particular way of sitting a horse as if man and mount were one being. It was Kieran himself, coming to fulfill his promise. Breaking away from the crowd, Kathleen ran toward him, heedless of muddy streets and curious onlookers. Kieran spotted her and urged his horse to a faster pace, closing the distance between them. When he was near enough, he swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion and caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in a joyous embrace. "You came," she whispered against his neck, breathing in the beloved scent of him. "You really came." "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," Kieran replied, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "The minute the trail looked passable, I set out." He pulled back just far enough to see her face, his eyes drinking in every detail as if making sure she was really there. "God, I've missed you, Mrs. Quinn." The name, spoken in his deep voice with such obvious love, sent warmth spreading through Kathleen despite the lingering chill in the air. "And I've missed you, Mr. Quinn." Their reunion kiss, witnessed by half the town and enthusiastically approved with cheers and applause, was the subject of good-natured teasing for years to come. Neither Kieran nor Kathleen cared after months of separation. They were together again, and nothing else mattered. They spent 2 days in Silverton, allowing Kathleen to finalize her arrangements and say proper goodbyes to the friends who had become her family during her years in the mining town. On the morning of the third day, they set out for Kieran's ranch, their ranch now riding side by side along trails still edged with patches of melting snow, but clearly passable. "It's a beautiful day for a journey," Kieran observed as they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the mountains stretching toward the horizon. "A beautiful day for a homecoming," Kathleen amended, reaching across to squeeze his hand briefly. "Take me home, Kieran." "With pleasure, my love." He gestured toward the trail ahead. "Follow me, I know the way." As they rode northward beneath the vast Colorado sky, Kathleen felt a profound sense of rightness. Her life had taken an unexpected turn that autumn day when she'd become lost in the canyons. But that wrong turn had led her to the right path, a path she now traveled beside the man she loved, heading toward a future they would build together. Late afternoon sun bathed the valley in golden light as Kieran and Kathleen crested the final ridge. Below them, nestled against the base of a towering mesa, lay the Quinn Ranch. From this vantage point, Kathleen could see the main house, a substantial log structure with a stone chimney, smoke curling invitingly from its top. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, a bunkhouse, what appeared to be a workshop. Beyond these, fenced pastures stretched toward distant hills where cattle grazed peacefully. "Welcome home," Kieran said softly, watching her face for her reaction. Kathleen took in the scene with growing excitement. The ranch was larger and more established than she had imagined from Kieran's descriptions. Not a rough frontier outpost, but a proper working ranch that spoke of years of careful stewardship. "It's beautiful," she breathed, genuinely impressed. "You've built something wonderful here." Pride and pleasure showed plainly on Kieran's face. "It's been hard work, but worth every callus and sunburn," he pointed toward the house. "I've been busy while we were apart. Wait until you see inside." They rode down the slope toward the ranch buildings. As they approached, a stocky, weathered man emerged from the barn, followed by 2 younger cowboys. The older man waved enthusiastically, a broad grin splitting his leathery face. "Charlie," Kieran explained. "My foreman and right hand for nearly 10 years now." The 2 behind him are Miguel and Thomas, good hands both of them. Charlie strode forward to greet them as they dismounted in the yard. "About time you got back, boss," he said gruffly, though the warmth in his eyes belied his tone. "Been telling these young bucks tall tales about your lovely bride for so long, they were starting to think I'd made her up." He turned to Kathleen with a respectful touch to his hat brim. "Mrs. Quinn, it's a genuine pleasure to welcome you to the North Star Ranch." "Thank you, Charlie," Kathleen replied warmly. "I'm delighted to finally meet you after hearing so much about you in Kieran's letters." "All lies, I'm sure," Charlie chuckled. He gestured toward the two younger men who stood a respectful distance back, looking somewhat awed by Kathleen's presence. "Miguel Garcia and Thomas Franklin are resident bronc busters and cow wranglers." Both young men touched their hats, murmuring greetings. Kathleen smiled at them, noting Miguel's shy demeanor and Thomas's freckled, open face. "I look forward to getting to know you both." "Let's get you settled," Kieran suggested, his hand finding the small of her back in that now familiar gesture. "Charlie, would you see to the horses? We've had a long ride." "Of course, boss. I'll have Miguel bring your bags to the house." The foreman began issuing quiet instructions to the younger men, as Kieran led Kathleen toward the main house. Up close, the house was even more impressive, built of massive pine logs carefully fitted together, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides and tall windows that would admit plenty of light. Kieran opened the heavy front door with a flourish, then surprised Kathleen by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition says I should carry my bride across the threshold," he explained with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Even if we're a few months late in observing it." Laughing, Kathleen looped her arms around his neck as he carried her into their home. Inside, she was greeted by a sight that brought tears to her eyes. The main room was spacious and welcoming, with a stone fireplace at one end where a cheerful blaze already burned. Comfortable furniture was arranged to take advantage of both the fire's warmth and the views from large windows. But what truly touched her heart were the details Kieran had clearly attended to with her in mind. Bookshelves lined one wall, already partially filled with volumes, her books from the cottage in Silverton. She realized that he must have arranged to have transported during the winter, probably by sled when the snow was deepest and most stable. A spinning wheel stood in one corner beside a comfortable chair, positioned to catch the best light from the western windows. And everywhere, small touches spoke of thoughtfulness: dried flowers arranged in pottery vases, colorful woven rugs on the polished wood floor, framed pressed flowers that she recognized as those she had sent in her letters. "Kieran," she whispered as he set her gently on her feet. "How did you manage all this?" "I had help," he admitted, pleased by her reaction. "Mrs. Peterson was my co-conspirator in Silverton. She helped pack your things and get them to me. Charlie's wife, Sophia, helped arrange things here." He gestured toward the spinning wheel. "That was my special project. This winter carved it myself from patterns in a book I ordered from Denver." Overwhelmed, Kathleen moved through the room, touching objects, absorbing the care that had gone into creating this space for her. "It's perfect," she said finally, turning to face her husband with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "Absolutely perfect." Kieran crossed to her in two long strides, gathering her into his arms. "There's more," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Come see." He led her through the house, showing her the kitchen with its iron cookstove and well-stocked pantry, the dining room with a table large enough to seat 8 comfortably. And upstairs, 3 bedrooms, one clearly intended as the master suite, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt and windows that offered views of both the sunrise and sunset. "And this," Kieran said, opening the door to the 3rd bedroom, "is for whatever purpose you choose. I thought perhaps your herbs and medicinals, or sewing, or both. Whatever you need." The room was bright and airy, with built-in shelves and a large work table positioned beneath windows that would provide excellent light. Kathleen could immediately envision it filled with her dressmaking supplies, her botanical specimens, her healing herbs. "You've thought of everything," she marveled, turning to face him. Kieran's expression grew serious, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I wanted you to feel that this is truly your home, not just mine that you're joining." I wanted you to have space for all the parts of yourself, the healer, the dressmaker, the woman. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in that tender gesture she had come to love. I want you to be happy here, Kathleen, more than anything. How could I not be? She asked softly, leaning into his touch. You've given me not just a house, but a home, and more importantly, you've given me yourself. There in the sunlit room that represented their future together, Kieran drew her into his arms and kissed her with all the longing of their months apart. Kathleen responded in kind, her hands sliding up to tangle in his dark hair, her body molding against his as if they had been designed to fit together perfectly. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn, he whispered. I am home, Kathleen replied with absolute certainty. Wherever you are, that's my home now. Spring flowed into summer, bringing new life to the ranch and to Kathleen's days. She settled into life as Mrs. Quinn with surprising ease, finding joy in establishing routines and traditions that would shape their life together. The work was different from her life in Silverton, harder in some ways, more physically demanding but deeply satisfying. She planted a large garden near the house, combining practical vegetables with the herbs and flowers that were her passion. Kieran built her a small greenhouse where she could start seedlings early and extend the growing season into autumn. By midsummer, she had established a thriving plot that provided not only for their table, but also the medicinal herbs she used to tend to the inevitable injuries and ailments that occurred on a working ranch. The ranch hands quickly grew to respect her healing abilities. When Miguel was thrown from a particularly ornery bronc and dislocated his shoulder, it was Kathleen who set it with quick, competent hands and prepared a poultice that reduced the swelling and pain. When Thomas developed a raging fever after a drenching rain caught him far from shelter, her herbal teas and cool compresses brought it down when nothing else had helped. Mrs. Quinn's got the touch, Charlie declared after she treated a deep cut on his arm that might otherwise have festered. Better than any doctor I've known. Word of her skills spread beyond the ranch. Neighboring homesteaders began to seek her out for remedies and advice. A young Ute woman, hesitant at first but growing bolder with each visit, began to share knowledge of native plants that Kathleen had never encountered. They developed a friendship that transcended cultural boundaries, each learning from the other. Kieran watched his wife's growing circle of influence with pride and satisfaction. You're becoming quite the local legend, he teased one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Hardly that, Kathleen demurred, though she couldn't hide her pleasure at his words. I'm just doing what I can to help where I'm needed. Like you helped me, Kieran said softly, taking her hand, finding me when I didn't even know I was lost. Kathleen leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her like a warm tide. I believe we found each other, my love, and neither of us has been lost since. As autumn approached once more, bringing with it the anniversary of their first meeting, Kathleen began to suspect a change in her own condition. The subtle signs were familiar from her first marriage, though she had never been blessed with a child then despite years of hoping. Now, at 31, she found herself counting days, noting small changes in her body and wondering if perhaps their happiness was about to multiply. She kept her suspicions to herself until she was certain, wanting to be sure before sharing such momentous news with Kieran. By early October, when the aspen trees had turned to gold and the first frost had kissed her garden, she could no longer doubt. A child was growing beneath her heart, their child, a living testament to the love they had found in each other. On the anniversary of the day Kieran had found her lost in the canyons, Kathleen prepared a special dinner: venison steak, fresh bread, vegetables from their garden, and an apple pie still warm from the oven. She set the table with care, using the good dishes they typically reserved for Christmas and other significant occasions. Kieran raised an eyebrow when he came in from the day's work to find such an elaborate meal waiting. "What's the occasion?" he asked, washing up at the basin near the door. "Don't you remember what day it is?" Kathleen replied, lighting the candles she had placed on the table. He thought for a moment, then understanding dawned in his eyes. The day we met, 1 year ago today. 1 year since a lost woman was found by a cowboy who knew the way home, Kathleen confirmed with a smile. I thought it deserved a celebration. Dinner was a leisurely affair, filled with reminiscences of their unusual courtship and expressions of gratitude for the life they had built together. When they had finished the pie and moved to the sofa before the fire, Kieran surprised Kathleen by producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. I have something for you, he said, a touch of nervousness in his voice, to mark the occasion. Curious, Kathleen unwrapped the package to reveal a small wooden box similar to the one that had contained her compass rose brooch. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny painting on one side, a remarkably good likeness of Kieran, and on the other, a lock of his dark hair secured beneath a small crystal. It's beautiful, she breathed, genuinely touched by the romantic gesture. I thought. Kieran hesitated, uncharacteristically shy. I thought perhaps someday on the other side you might put a lock of our child's hair when we are blessed that way. The perfect opening had been given to her. Kathleen took Kieran's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach, holding it there with her own. Sooner than you might think, my love. For a moment, Kieran stared at their joined hands, not comprehending. Then his eyes widened, flying to her face in search of confirmation. Kathleen. Are you saying? She nodded, her eyes shining with happy tears. Yes, we're going to have a baby, Kieran, in early spring, I believe. Joy transformed his features, making him look years younger. With infinite tenderness, he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she had suddenly become infinitely precious and fragile. A baby, he whispered against her hair. Our baby. The beginning of our family, Kathleen agreed, feeling his heart pounding against hers. Kieran pulled back to look into her eyes, his own suspiciously bright. I never thought I could be this happy, he confessed. Never imagined I would find someone like you, much less be blessed with a child. I'm not sure what I did to deserve such fortune, but I promise you this. His hand cradled her cheek with exquisite gentleness. I will spend every day of my life making sure you and our child know how deeply you are loved. We already know, Kathleen assured him, leaning into his touch. You show us in 1,000 ways every day. As they sat together before the fire, making plans and dreaming dreams for their child's future, Kathleen marveled at the twisting path that had led her to this moment. A wrong turn in a canyon, a chance encounter with a kind cowboy, a storm that had delayed his departure from town, all seemingly random events that had combined to create this precious life they now shared. Do you ever wonder, she asked softly, what might have happened if you hadn't been riding in that particular canyon on that particular evening? Kieran considered the question seriously, his thumb tracing lazy circles on her palm as it often did when he was thoughtful. I believe we would have found each other anyway, he said finally. Maybe not that day or in that way, but somehow, some souls are meant to meet, I think. Like pieces of a puzzle that fit perfectly together, Kathleen suggested, exactly like that. He kissed her temple, his lips lingering against her skin. Besides, you needed someone to show you the trail home. And now we're blazing our own trail together, Kathleen said, resting her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. I can't wait to see where it leads. Wherever it goes, Kieran promised, his arms tightening around her and their unborn child, we'll walk it side by side, always. As twilight deepened outside their windows and stars began to appear in the vast Colorado sky, Kathleen knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a husband, but a true partner for life's journey. What had begun as a desperate moment of being lost had led to the profound joy of being found not just by Kieran, but by the love they had created together, a love that would now live on in their child and in all the days to come. The trail ahead might not always be easy to navigate, but they would face its challenges and celebrate its joys together, guiding each other home with every step. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered.